Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm Teresa Lagerman. I'm the Community and Events Manager at the Highlands Current. This is our second event for Current Conversations. It's a new online series where we'll feature someone from the news every week for an open conversation. We want to hear your questions. You can submit them using the Q&A button that's along the bottom of your screen. And we're very excited to introduce our guest tonight. We have Nell Timmer, who is just back from a pandemic extended staycation in Patagonia with her family of 7. Our editor, Chip Rowe, who is also joining us tonight, featured Nell and her family when they were a few weeks into their adventure. And now we're continuing that conversation.
There we are. Let us, the rental company was not going to let us take the van out of Chile. So we were effectively stuck in southern Patagonia.
And this was when you had the rental car. You were going to take the car into Argentina.
Yes.
Right.
And that ended up being a trip south instead.
Right. So at that point, we were a 3-hour flight from Santiago and then another 2.5-hour drive south. So almost with the penguins in Antarctica, like really far down there.
How did the kids respond to this? You know, because I've driven 3 kids around. I having 5 and just saying, well, guess what? We're changing plans. We're going somewhere else. Were they cool with it, or did they?
Yeah, I mean, I think they rolled. They weren't really hyper focused on what our itinerary was. So I don't think they really were that affected by it. For us, I think it was more stressful because we still wanted, at that period of time, we were really still trying to enjoy our days out. We did end up getting 2 days in Torres del Paine National Park before they closed it. We didn't get to do any big hikes, but we got to drive around and actually go through the gates of the national park. So that was great. But then every night we would get back to our Airbnb and get on Wi-Fi, because that was the only way we could check what was happening in the world. And our phone would be exploding with messages and New York Times alerts and everything, was crashing at home. So we would get back to the house and it would be this kind of period of time where we would try to figure out what was going on in the world and what was the best decision at that day.
Well, when were you going to come back?
So we were supposed to come back April 1st. And I think somewhere around maybe St. Patrick's Day, March 17th or 18th, we discovered that our return flight on United had been canceled. No, they didn't even, it was nothing. I was just checking in because of what was happening, and I logged in to check the status of the flight, and it was not there. So at that point, we were sort of what do we do? So we had only had this Airbnb for a couple of days, and we decided to try and find someplace less expensive in town where we would be able to walk to stores and things like that, because the original Airbnb we had was a couple miles out of town. So we checked out, walked into town, and we're kind of hacking Wi-Fi and on air, live messaging people on Airbnb, can we come over and get the keys now?
Yeah, definitely. Can we stay?
And can we stay for 3 weeks, or
It'll
maybe
be fine. It'll be fine. It's just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
Well, kids come in the back. Go around the back. Kids go around the back.
Yeah.
And no place is set up to hold 7, so you got to type in 5, and hopefully they don't see.
Right. And you take shifts. The kids take shifts.
Exactly. We had to hide Graham under raincoat.
Yeah. So was this at this point? Had Chile shut down? Was it sort of like here, where everything all of a sudden one day it was fine and the next day?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
That weekend, I think.
Yeah, the national parks closed on the 17th. The town we were in
shortly after that
was okay. we were in a town of about 18,000 people, Puerto Natales, and they, even when we left, only had 9 cases. But pretty quickly, maybe a week in, so maybe March 23rd, maybe a little later, there was a quarantine on the city that we flew into, Punta Arenas.
Oh, okay.
And they had, they were exploding. So they were 3 hours away.
Because that's a place where a lot of cruise ships dock.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like a lot of people on cruise ships will disembark there. So
is that the place you had to go to fly out?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to go back to there, then fly to another city in Chile or Santiago, and then go from there.
So what they started doing, it seemed like their strategy was to kind of cordon off each town. So there were like police roadblocks going into and out of all of the towns. And so Punta Arenas, it was like there was no one coming in or going out. So at that point, there were still a few, at that point, all US flights had canceled to and from Chile, but there were still some South American airline flights running. But the struggle at that point was what happened. At that point, Santiago was on full lockdown. You couldn't leave your house unless it was an emergency. And so I was nervous about say we get a flight, they let us into Punta Arenas to get to the flight to Santiago. What if we get to Santiago and then that flight gets canceled and we're stuck in Santiago with 5 kids and we're not allowed to leave the apartment
or the airport?
And how do we right?
And how do we get food and where do we go? So we were constantly kind of weighing the safety of leaving where we were and all the steps that it would take to actually get all the way back to New York.
So what convinced you in the end to get that flight? You ended up in Miami, is that right?
Right. Yeah. So ultimately, Chile decided on April 13th to shut down all flights in and out of the country for 2 weeks. So from April 13th to April 30th, there were no flights, anything. So then we just were like hunkered in. We realized at the beginning of April that was where it was going. And so we just kind of hunkered down for the month and were crossing our fingers that things would open up again in May, as they said, which they did. And for a minute, we got a flight to New York and then they canceled it. So
but they let you know again, they texted you.
They let you know after you bought the ticket, and then they let you know there'd be no refund.
Right. It's a good system.
Yes.
Keeps the airlines going.
Yeah.
So you had to take a risk. I mean, it was,
right.
In effect, leaving that Airbnb, you just had to hope that when you got there, that plane was going to take off.
Yeah. So the Miami, at least we had multiple conversations with the airlines representatives, and we're pretty well convinced that the Miami flight was a go. And at that point, we had more information about the roadblocks and things that, that if we had proof that we were flying, they would let us through the roadblocks and things like that, which I had been a little nervous about.
Yeah.
But I will say they had much more kind of regulation and tracking on leaving. So to leave the city, we had to do a police affidavit saying we didn't have any symptoms. We had 2 roadblocks before Punta Arenas, one leaving Natales and one in the middle of nowhere, where they took us into a house and did temperature checks on everybody.
Jeez.
Every occupant of every vehicle was out of the truck in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Every car.
And then when we got to the airport, we had to fill out another police affidavit form and 2 more temperature checks in the airport. And there was almost no one on the flight first of all, the flight to Miami was the only flight leaving the international terminal in Santiago Airport. Like, it was the only flight, and there were probably 20 people on it, and 7 of them were us.
And they made you wear masks,
and they required they required masks on that flight. And then we landed in Miami and we went to customs and we asked the guy, so what do we have to do now that we're here back in the US? And he said, have a nice day, enjoy Miami.
Yeah. We don't have those kind of tough standards.
No, we don't have armed soldiers on the corner letting people into the stores.
Yeah, geez. How did the kids? We have some questions here. I'm seeing pile up. I'm sorry. I'm gonna ask one more. Okay. How did the kids hold up? And so you're in this Airbnb for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, we ended up there for like five weeks. Yeah.
Television shows are all in Spanish.
Unfortunately, we could get American Netflix.
Oh, you could. Okay, so you didn't have it that tough. Okay.
I feel bad admitting we did.
So you could get friends and stuff. You at least had friends. But so they did their schoolwork. I mean, did everybody go a little nuts though? I mean, not being home.
No, yeah. I mean, they did pretty well.
We all had our tough moments.
Yeah.
We all had our tough moments.
Yeah.
I can admit that. It was a tight space. It was 800 square feet. For 7 of us, so it was tight, and I mean, it was fun. Like, we didn't have a lot of clutter and we didn't have a lot of stuff, and so didn't have to do all the cleaning maintenance that we have to do here, but we did have a lot of together time.
We could walk to the fruit store, we could walk to the meat store, we could walk to the grocery store. Kids got used to that,
I see.
Yeah, that was
no
nice.
vehicles necessary.
They could walk to the park. They got pretty independent by the end, which was cool. They got to know the town, and they got to know where things were, and they knew how to navigate their way to and from stores and parks,
right,
things like that. So I feel like we sort of took a trip to do reconnaissance, and now we have to go back.
Sure.
we have to pre-plan the trip, knowing what we know now.
That's right.
And where we could go the next time when we go back and everything's open.
Well, why wait? I mean, the airline tickets now are really cheap.
They are.
To get back down there. Well, we had a question from a listener here, which we probably should have done. Go through your kids, and did they have different reactions? Did Graham do better than Henry, or
right? Good.
They all probably had different.
So we have Henry's 15, Jasper's 12, Emmett's 10, Mira's 9, and Graham is 5.
I think you missed one. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. You didn't miss anybody. That's fine.
Kid. I think the fact that we were, it was kind of nice to sit and reflect in that, like, home is where your people are kind of thing, because we were all together, and that was really all that mattered. I think the adjustment, once it was clear we were going to stay there for a little while longer, and they had to do this transition to online schooling, that's a whole other ball of wax. So
and somebody I mailed, I guess Jasper was desperate for a basketball, you had said. So,
there aren't a lot of basketballs in Chile, as you can imagine.
Just soccer balls, I'm sure.
Right.
So we got a couple of basketballs. There was a little funny story with the article that was in the paper. Somehow made it to someone in Maryland.
Oh, this is a good story.
And then that person in Maryland was following a woman on Instagram who's traveling South America. And her husband, and 2 kids were stuck in Natales.
Oh, the same town.
Same town. So that woman, it was like, okay, I'll find Nell through Instagram, and so these folks from Utah found us by way of an article in the
Highlands
Current.
They weren't next door to you or something. That would really be a great story. They were somewhere else in town.
Yeah. And so
did you ever meet them or anything? Or how
we did.
Oh, good.
Good. Yeah, it was great.
Did the State Department ever get a hold of you as far as evacuating Americans, or would they just kind of sit tight?
It was up to us.
A little bit of both.
But when the last flight out was happening, they were, they called me a bunch of times and got me in touch with people in Natales who could drive us to the airport. But
they were the ones that finally gave us that information that we would have been able to get through the roadblock if we had plane tickets, which I had been pretty nervous about. So they gave us that information.
Good.
We registered through the State Department on their STEP program, which they had for travelers that were stranded abroad. So then that was nice because we would get an email every couple of days about what the changes in Chile were, like what towns were on lockdown, what was happening with the flights. Like they would give us a little update every couple of days. So that was super helpful. In terms of the kids, I think in a way it was almost like hardest on Henry. Like I feel like
interesting. Huh.
I feel like it was this big kind of mourning for him of like this independent life that he had where he was getting on the train and going to school and he was on his own all day long and then coming home at like 7:30 at night, and all of a sudden he was like locked in this tiny space with all of his
right.
family,
and he's a caretaker.
And I was constantly going, what are you doing? What are you doing on your phone? What are you doing? What are you
that's
doing?
Great.
And he
stuck
was like,
with your mom. 15-year-old
like,
boy stuck with his mom in a room for 3 weeks.
Oh my God.
It doesn't get better than that. Does not get better
alone.
than that. No, that's good for the distancing you're going to have to do in the next few years.
Yeah, basically when we landed, he went up to his room and didn't come out for 48 hours.
Yeah. How was it when you got back to the house? Did you sleep well that night? Was it a thing where you all crashed, or were you anxious about being back? Or
Mira in particular was like, Mom, she woke up the next morning. She was like, that was the best I've slept in 2 months.
Right. Yeah, I guess you kind of fall into bed and
Natalis has this problem with street dogs. There's 18,000 people and 4,000 dogs.
Wow.
And they bark all night.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's true.
It's like the car horns of.
You never hear a car horn down there.
But it's
drowned out by the dogs.
Barking all night long.
Oh man.
Yeah. So that was intense.
So it's like relatively like peaceful in Garrison.
Yeah.
Well, we heard birds again. The first night when we were upstairs in our room and like we were awoken by a chirping bird. We were like, what's happening?
Yeah. Freaked you out.
Yeah.
Well, now you've gone back to work. I was surprised that you got back on last Friday, but you're already back at work at Westchester Medical Center.
Yeah.
And you're in the pediatric intensive care ICU. So are you seeing the effect of COVID at this point when you go in? I mean, obviously the safety protocols are much tighter, I'm sure, but.
I had my first COVID patient last night in our unit. So we're starting to see more of, I don't know if people are reading about the things that they're seeing with kids now where they're having a kind of a multi-system inflammatory process that happens. What brings the kids in is not respiratory problems, but the kind of things that happen later down the line from the virus. So heart problems with their heart, problems, neurological issues, kidney problems.
So they've gotten over the initial respiratory
or the kids
symptom kind of thing?
A lot of the kids just don't even really seem to show any kind of symptoms of that part in that way. They just really show symptoms of these other in these other organ systems.
Right. So once you're seeing them in the ICU, that's somebody on a respirator, somebody who's advanced enough that they need intensive care.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that so? That must have been kind of emotionally difficult, maybe. I mean, you're kind of coming back and stepping right back into that and seeing all this stuff you've been reading about and.
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely, because when I was down there, I was trying to read all the medical articles I could and keep up with what was happening and how it was being treated. And I was reading a ton of stuff to keep myself current, which was good, but also a little bit anxiety producing, as you can imagine.
Well, you were on vacation technically.
Right.
You'd like to preserve some of that. But.
Yeah. So, last night to kind of go and have my first COVID patient was definitely a little.
Yeah.
I was definitely very anxious.
But are you comforted, like when you go in, do you feel safe yourself? Like the protocols are pretty strict?
Yeah, absolutely. We have all the protective gear we need. We have a protocol for how to put it on, how to take it off. They actually even had an additional support nurse for me last night so that once I got all my gear on, because that takes probably 5 minutes to get all the gear on. and then you go in the room, and God forbid you forget something, you would have to take it all off, go out of the room, get the thing, put it all back on, go back in the room. So they actually provided me kind of an assistant nurse last night, so that I could, like, if I got all my stuff on and I went in the room and I forgot something, I could kind of, you know, crack the door open and ask that person to go get me whatever it was I forgot.
Yeah. So are these babies that are, oh, sorry.
Yeah, it was just really cool.
I was just gonna, so the babies in the pediatric, are they susceptible to this kind of thing? Obviously, they must be.
So because the medical center was so full over, you know, while I was gone, with COVID cases, generally the pediatric ICU, we might see young people up until when they're 21 or 22. And those are generally people that have kind of chronic conditions that have been seen through the years by the unit. So they're kind of a known quantity. But with COVID, they were sending any patients that were 30 years old and lower to the pediatric ICU, just kind of as overflow. Because we do have the ventilators and we have the respiratory therapists, we have everything that we could, you know, to help those people. So we were treating anyone up to age 30 with COVID. And I did hear from going in last night that there had been a couple of babies, little ones, but I don't think not that many.
Yeah. Somebody commented, again, a listener, that the drone videos that you posted on Instagram were amazing, which I agree. I did notice, I had the question, like, who's flying it? I counted the kids to make sure there wasn't enough. I saw Graham, I was like, did they actually put the kid up there? How did you do? Did you rent a drone or something? You can find a drone, but you can't get a flight home. What's going on?
I had my brother-in-law is a crazy tech, you know, mad guy, and he was like, you can't go there without a drone, and he told me which one to buy. So
by the way, this was our Christmas present. I think the kids have kind of forgotten that. Like, we didn't get
the trip was the Christmas present.
We didn't get them anything for Christmas. The trip was the Christmas present. So Ted's Christmas gift to himself was the drone.
Oh, okay.
So I got this little tiny Mavic drone. And, you know, me not being a tech guy, I bought it and it just sat in the box. And my brother-in-law was like, dude, have you been flying it? Come on, you got to learn how to use the thing before you get there. And he gave me a couple of quick pointers. And there's some programmable shots that are specific to this. It's called a Mavic Mini. You don't have to license it in the US because it's lighter. It's so lightweight. So you program the shot. It counts down. You hide the remote. It flies itself, and
wow,
it
like in a.
It's
well, let me see if
cool.
I can.
You say do a spiral, and it just does like spiral around you.
Let me see if I can share screen here, and I'll just play it.
But one thing that was super challenging about the drone shots is that in Patagonia, frequently there's very high wind. So to
you're just seeing me, right? Nobody's seeing me.
No, we can see
Oh, okay, all right.
So this was, so kind of in the last like 2 weeks when we were there, because Puerto Natales had shut down so effectively, at that point, I think people were starting to get more comfortable with opening up again. So in the last week that we were there, we were able to take 2 really special trips, and this was one of them, to an area called Sierra Baguales, which was a little bit northeast of where we were staying.
Yes.
See, my kids would all have ropes on them tied to me. Now, I mean, that's the first thought I had. Are you guys keeping an eye on them? Where's Graham? Is he in the center? That would make me nervous.
There was one little walk point where we went to get to that lookout place that the kids kept like looking over and throwing rocks. And I was like, stop it! Stop it!
This is another one, or this was the.
Oh, that was the condor. That was amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Where's the other one? There was another one of the drone, right?
It might have. Oh yeah. I don't know if I put another drone one on there.
Oh, I thought I saw it too. Oh,
well. Yeah, so we saw some incredible.
Maybe right there. No, that's not it in the middle, is it? No.
We saw some incredible wildlife. Lots of condors from the hike where Ted and I are holding hands there, and the one next to it. From that peak, those condors would just fly probably 10 feet over our head.
right.
And just with this wingspan, and they sounded like helicopters. It was just really wild.
Yeah.
Lots of guanacos and nyandus, little flightless birds, flamingos. There's a Chilean flamingo.
Did you know what a nandu was before you went down there? No. Okay.
Henry did.
Did he?
Yeah, Henry was reading. A book about Patagonia. So
okay. What was the story behind this photo?
So this was the first thing we did, like when things started to thaw and we got out. We had the people that we had rented our original house from own a couple of estancias or ranches in Puerto Natales and outside of, and they run a tourist business to this estancia. So we were able to kind of get our own private day at the estancia. So we had to take a boat ride into the Last Hope Fjord, and
that's great.
Go to how many acres was that?
50,000 acres.
Wow.
Yeah.
50,000 acres. So you got off the boat, you walked up the dock, and like the land just opened up, and there was like these 3 red buildings, like that one you see behind Graham. And we walked in, and they had coffee for us, and they had a lamb that had been recently slaughtered roasting on a spit.
They have any bacon?
Another building.
or you had bacon soon after this photo was taken.
Right.
Right?
There was a really cute little baby sheep running around, and we were trying to figure out if we should tell them that's what we were eating for lunch.
Oh, yeah. A lot of parenting going on, a lot of parenting.
And we got to take a horse ride on those beautiful white horses. We were all on.
Oh, right here, yeah.
Yeah, on a fleet of those
man,
white
this
horses.
was all towards the end of the trip then, huh? Before you came back?
Yeah. So it redeemed the vacation aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, what is your, somebody else has asked a good question. I mean, I don't know if you'd be thinking about it on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday after you get back, but what's next? Where do you want to go next besides back?
Right.
Patagonia. I guess Argentina might be on the list, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Chile is, it's just so insane. It really is. It's hard to describe.
We learned a lot about the history and the economics and the politics by kind of just being there and staying there for that long.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But there's a whole national park system that runs up the Pacific coast, and it's in fjords and glaciers and, spectacular vistas, volcanoes and
yeah, you could spend a lifetime just going back there and exploring the places there.
Up in the Lake District, Douglas Tompkins, who founded the North Face, he bought over 1 million acres, and just after he died, that was given to the Chilean government for national park. So that's I guess
kind of a newish
spectacular park.
How did you choose Patagonia? Was it?
I wanted to. The logo on the Patagonia, their logo on clothing is Fitzroy, Mount Fitzroy in Argentina. So the trip would have taken us from Puerto Natales to El Calafate to see one of the last real sizable glaciers, and then north to El Chaltén,
and to see Fitzroy.
Yeah. So
got it.
That's southern Patagonia. Then you can go further south to get into Tierra del Fuego, to Argentina penguins, all kinds of other kinds of views.
Right. So one of the funny thing, like one kind of funny thing as we were returning, we were sitting in the airport, one of the 20 people in the Santiago International Terminal, and I was trying to get the kids to like, okay, so we're heading home. Like, what did this mean? What was this like? What, kind of reflect. And we got to like really petulant, like teenage angsty kind of responses.
Yeah.
Like
rolling their eyes.
I've seen a lot of mountains. I don't need to see more mountains.
Yeah. When are we going to Disney World?
I've got a Reagan in my.
What the heck? Dad, this drone.
You've seen them all.
I know. Geez, can Dad put your drone down, Dad? I want to go to a water park or something.
So, that was like maybe not a highlight, but we worked through it, and I was reflecting on remembering being 15. I said to Henry the next day, I kind of woke up remembering that I had been 15 and my mother had taken us to Nova Scotia. It was like the first vacation we took after she got divorced, and she was like driving through Nova Scotia going, oh my God, look at the trees and look at the mountains. And I made fun of her for it for years, that I was just like, Mom, remember that vacation where we just drove and we drove
for 3 weeks and we couldn't get home,
and so Henry,
it all comes back to bite you.
It sure does. Henry and I had a good laugh about that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you both so much. I'm glad you're back. We're all glad you're back and safe. And
I don't know that I am, but it's a little culture shock.
Yeah. Everything.
Ted asked me to leave him, actually.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of just stuck in a different place now, but at least you know where everything is, right? You don't have to search through the kitchen for the utensils.
It's true. Well, and I have to say, I am extremely grateful for green vegetables.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Right.
A lot of green vegetables.
Right.
So we're having kale at every meal.
Yeah, kale chips.
Yes.
Well, thanks a lot. I hope to see you soon. Not over Zoom, and and see the kids, and hope they'll.
Well, we actually, I tried to get them to ride by your house today. We rode up Avery, but we got to the top of the hill, and Mira was like,
enough. Yeah, I understand completely.
Go back.
It's good that you got them outside.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you both very much. Thank you everybody for listening, and glad you're back. All right.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Keep an eye out for the next current conversation in the next week or two. And thank you for bearing with us with those technical difficulties at the beginning. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.